James Peterson, 30, had spent most of his life trying to live up to the legacy his late mother had left behind. She was an extraordinary woman, full of love and kindness, and never hesitated to help anyone who needed it. Even in her passing, just 1 year ago in a tragic car accident, her impact still echoed in every part of James' life. He had always admired her selflessness and how she had taught him to give without expecting anything in return. It was with this deep respect for his mother that James was about to take the next big step in his life. He was engaged to Lucy Harrington, a woman he had been in a relationship with for 2 years. Lucy, 28, was kind-hearted, driven, and seemed like the perfect fit for him. At least, that's what James thought. But the night of their engagement party, everything changed. The party, held in the spacious suburban home of Lucy's parents, was meant to be a joyous occasion. Friends and family from both sides gathered to celebrate, and everything seemed to be falling into place. It should have been an evening of excitement, anticipation, and love. But for James, something didn't feel right. As the evening went on, a strange tension started to creep in. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, perhaps a mix of the grief he still carried for his mother and the weight of the wedding planning. He tried to push those feelings aside. But when Lucy's father, Alan Harrington, stepped up to give a speech, things took a turn he couldn't have anticipated. Alan, a man in his early 50s with a sharp sense of humor, had been the one to help organize the party. He began by thanking everyone for coming, but his tone quickly shifted into something more mocking. "We're all here tonight to celebrate Lucy and James," Alan started, smiling broadly. "But let's not forget the real unsung hero in their lives. James' mother. Now, that woman always had a way of sticking her nose where it didn't belong." James' face flushed with surprise, but he tried to stay calm, thinking it was just a harmless joke. But Lucy's mother, Carol, chimed in next. "Remember that time she co-signed the loan for our house renovation? As if we needed her help." Carol laughed, but James felt a pang of pain in his chest. His mother had co-signed the loan for them out of generosity, never asking for anything in return. Yet here they were, ridiculing her. Lucy, who had been silent up until this point, joined in. "She was always so overbearing, trying to control everything," she said with a chuckle. The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter, but James could feel the weight of the mocking tone. "Let's hope our future in-laws don't meddle as much," Alan added, throwing a glance at James. His comment was met with more forced chuckles, but it felt like a slap in the face. James stood still, fists clenched, as the laughter continued. His heart pounded in his chest. He had never seen this side of Lucy or her parents before, and it cut deeper than he could have imagined. This wasn't just a joke, it was an attack on his mother's memory. The woman who had supported them, helped them, and loved them like family was being dragged through the mud in front of everyone. The crowd's laughter faded, and for a brief moment, there was silence. James' mind raced as the memories of all the sacrifices his mother had made for these people flooded his mind. How she had taken care of Lucy's younger siblings when their parents were busy, how she had helped them through tough times without asking for a single thing in return. He looked around the room at the faces of Lucy's family and friends. Some seemed to be aware of the tension in the air, but most just sat there, unsure of how to react. James glanced at Lucy, hoping for a sign of remorse, but all he saw was a smug smile. It was as if she was enjoying the attention, not understanding the hurt her family's words had caused. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alan wrapped up his speech, and the guests awkwardly returned to their conversations. James took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and he could feel the anger bubbling inside him. His mother had passed away a year ago, and here they were, making jokes about her as if she were just some figure in their past. It was as if she never meant anything to them. Lucy approached him, a frown on her face. "James, what's going on? You're making this awkward," she whispered. James turned to face her, his eyes filled with fury. "You think this is just awkward," he said, his voice steady but tight with emotion. "This is disrespect. This is cruelty. And you're sitting there laughing about it, acting like nothing's wrong." Lucy's expression faltered. "It was just a joke, James. You're overreacting." "A joke?" James' voice rose, and he could feel the room go silent. "A joke about my late mother, the woman who helped your family when you needed it? A joke about the woman who spent hours caring for your siblings, without ever asking for anything in return?" Lucy blinked, her face turning pale. "I didn't mean it like that. It wasn't meant to hurt you." "Then why didn't you say something?" James retorted. "Why did you just sit there and laugh?" The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. James knew, in that moment, that he couldn't go on with this wedding. How could he marry someone who didn't respect his mother, who laughed at the very person who had shaped him into the man he was today? The tension in the room was palpable as Lucy's face twisted in confusion, and Alan's smug expression turned to one of anger. James took a deep breath, looking around at the room full of people. "I can't do this," he said, his voice steady. "I'm calling off the wedding." Gasps filled the room. Lucy's face went pale, and Alan's eyes narrowed with fury. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to react. But James stood firm, his decision made. "I won't marry into a family that disrespects my mother," he said, his voice calm but resolute. The room erupted into chaos. Lucy tried to grab his arm, pleading with him to reconsider, but James shook her off. He turned and walked toward the door, his heart heavy but his mind clear. "I'm done," he muttered as he left, his family following suit. His phone buzzed with messages as soon as he stepped outside, some from his relatives offering support, others from Lucy's side, furious at his actions. But James didn't care. He had made the right choice. The days following James' decision were a blur. He couldn't shake the image of Lucy's face, pale, confused, then angry, as he'd walked away from her and her family. The engagement that had once felt so promising was now a distant memory, one that would be hard to forget. But what stung the most was how easily they had dismissed his mother's memory. To them, it seemed like a joke. To him, it was a betrayal that couldn't be undone. The first few hours after leaving the engagement party had been the worst. His phone had buzzed incessantly with calls from Lucy, her parents, and their friends. Some tried to comfort him, others lashed out in anger, accusing him of being too sensitive, too quick to overreact. But nothing they said could shake his resolve. James had gone straight to his father's house, needing some kind of support, some kind of anchor after the storm that had erupted in his life. His father, Greg Peterson, a steady, quiet man, sat with him in the living room without saying much at first. "You did the right thing," his father said after a while, his voice calm and reassuring. "I don't know, Dad," James replied, his voice strained. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought Lucy was the one. I thought her family was better than this." Greg placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The person you marry is a reflection of who they are, and unfortunately, their family shapes them in ways you might not expect. If they can mock your mother's memory like that, they weren't the right people for you." James nodded, the weight of his father's words sinking in. He had been blind to the red flags, too wrapped up in the excitement of the wedding to see what was really in front of him. The next day, Lucy tried to call him again, but James didn't pick up. The incessant ringing became unbearable, so he turned his phone off for a while, not wanting to hear what she had to say. That evening, he finally gave in and checked his voicemail. Lucy's voice broke through, filled with desperation. "James, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how bad it was for you. I never meant for you to feel like that. I was just caught up in the moment with my dad and—" James stopped the message before it could continue. He didn't need to hear more. The excuses, the pleas for forgiveness, they all felt hollow. She had laughed with her father, joined in mocking his mother, and now, after the fallout, she was trying to make it seem like it was all a misunderstanding. The next message came an hour later, this time from Alan, her father. His voice was cold, full of rage. "You humiliated my family in front of everyone, James. You've ruined everything. This wedding was supposed to bring our two families together. Instead, you've thrown it all away over a couple of jokes. You'll regret this." James didn't even respond to that one. Alan's tone was a reminder of the man he'd always seen as self-centered and entitled, someone who thought the world owed him everything. It was clear now that the man who had helped him secure the loan for his house renovation years ago had never done it out of kindness. He had done it because he expected something in return, his daughter's marriage to someone who could offer him a future of financial stability and social standing. Later that evening, Lucy showed up at James' father's house. She had a bag in her hand, her face tear-streaked and her eyes pleading. "James, please," she said, voice cracking as she stepped into the living room. "I need to talk to you. I need to apologize. I was wrong. I never should have laughed at your mother. It was thoughtless. I didn't realize how much it hurt you." James felt his anger stir again, but this time, there was something else too. A sense of finality. "You didn't realize, Lucy?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "Did you even care?" She took a step forward, her voice becoming frantic. "Of course, I care. I care about you. But my dad, he's always been like that. He makes jokes, and I didn't think it would upset you so much. You have to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you." James shook his head, unable to listen any longer. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Lucy, I don't think you understand. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt my mother's memory, and that's something I can't forgive. I tried to overlook it, tried to convince myself that you were different, but now I see the truth. You laughed. You joined in. You were complicit." Her eyes filled with tears, and she took another step toward him. "Please, James, don't throw everything away over this. I love you. I was just caught up in the moment. This is bigger than a joke." "No, Lucy," James said firmly. "This is about respect. It's about loyalty. You didn't have either when it came to my mother. And that's unforgivable." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, her face buried in her hands. But James didn't feel the urge to comfort her. He felt numb, detached from everything that had once seemed so right. There was no going back now. Over the next week, things spiraled out of control. Lucy's family, humiliated by the public breakup, turned on James completely. Alan, furious at being exposed for his cruel jokes and sense of entitlement, threatened legal action. He called James every day, demanding that he apologize for ruining their family's reputation. "You've made a huge mistake," Alan yelled over the phone. "You've ruined your life over a couple of harmless jokes. You'll regret this, mark my words." But James couldn't regret his decision. If anything, it only reaffirmed that he had done the right thing. Lucy tried to reach out countless times, but every time she did, James shut her out. He couldn't stomach her attempts to manipulate the situation, as though his mother's memory was just some trivial matter. His family stood by him, offering support as he went through the painful process of calling off the wedding, canceling plans, and reclaiming the engagement ring. His father and friends reminded him that he had made a decision that respected the woman who had always been there for him. But even with all that support, the process of ending a relationship that had once seemed so promising still weighed heavily on his heart. He couldn't help but feel the void left by the loss of both his mother and the future he had envisioned with Lucy. As the days passed, James found himself overwhelmed with a mix of emotions. There were moments when he couldn't believe that what was supposed to be the happiest time of his life had turned into this chaotic mess. He'd spent the last few years imagining a future with Lucy, building a life together, eventually marrying, having children, creating their own memories. Now, all of that was gone. His mind kept replaying that night over and over, Lucy's laughter, her father's mocking tone, the way they both seemed to care so little for the one person who had always been there for him. It wasn't just that they had disrespected his mother. It was the revelation of who they really were, people who took, but never gave. People who laughed at the expense of others, who twisted kindness into a joke. James wasn't sure what hurt more, losing Lucy or losing the illusion of the future they'd planned together. He found himself questioning everything, the people he thought he knew, the family he thought he understood, and most importantly, the kind of person he had allowed himself to become in the process. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to mourn. Not just the loss of his mother, but the loss of the life he had imagined with Lucy. A few weeks after the breakup, things had settled somewhat. The constant barrage of messages and threats from Lucy and her family began to quiet down. They still sent messages, but James had learned to ignore them, and slowly, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. His friends and family continued to support him, reminding him that he had done the right thing, even if it hadn't felt that way at first. He spent time with his father, helping him with small projects around the house. His father's steady presence and quiet wisdom were a balm to James' fractured heart. Greg never tried to push James to talk about his feelings, but he made it clear that he was there if James ever wanted to open up. Gradually, James found his focus again. He returned to his work as a graphic designer, throwing himself into projects that had been on the back burner for too long. But it wasn't just work that helped him find peace, it was the simple things, taking long walks in the park, cooking dinner for himself, reconnecting with old friends who had been sidelined during his engagement. One afternoon, as James was walking through the local farmer's market, he saw someone familiar, his old high school friend, Claire. She was standing by a fruit stand, selecting a basket of strawberries. Their eyes met, and she smiled. "James. Wow, it's been so long," she said, waving him over. He couldn't help but smile back. Claire had always been one of those people who could make him feel at ease, even in the most awkward situations. "I know, right? It's been forever," he said, walking up to her. "How've you been?" "Good, good. You know how it is, work, life, the usual. And you? You look different. Happier, maybe?" James paused for a moment. He wasn't sure how to explain it. How could he possibly put into words the tumult of emotions that had turned his life upside down in the last few months? "I've been better," he said finally. "I went through some stuff. But I'm getting through it." "Yeah, I can tell," Claire said, her gaze softening. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm around. And if you want to grab a coffee sometime, just let me know." James found himself nodding, genuinely grateful. "Thanks, Claire. That means a lot." They exchanged numbers, and though the encounter was brief, it left him with a sense of calm he hadn't realized he needed. Maybe the world wasn't as small and cruel as he'd thought. Maybe there were people out there who still understood what it meant to truly respect one another. Months passed, and though James wasn't ready to dive into anything serious with anyone, his friendship with Claire grew. They spent weekends hiking, grabbing coffee, and talking about everything, work, life, love, and the things that made them both who they were. It wasn't a romantic relationship, not yet at least, but it was a reminder to James of what genuine, respectful connections looked like. Claire didn't take him for granted. She didn't mock his mother or belittle him in any way. She simply listened, offered support, and never judged. One evening, as they were having dinner at a local Italian restaurant, Claire looked at him thoughtfully. "James," she said, setting down her glass of wine, "I know you've been through a lot, and I'm not trying to rush anything. But I want you to know that you deserve someone who sees you, who respects you and all the people who matter to you. You don't have to settle for anything less." James was taken aback by the sincerity in her voice. The way she said it, so plainly, but with such genuine care, made him realize something. Maybe he had been holding on to the wrong idea of what love was. Maybe love wasn't about living up to some ideal, some checklist of what the world expected. Maybe it was about finding someone who could see you for who you truly were, flaws and all, and who could love and respect you for it. "Thanks, Claire," James said quietly. "That means a lot to me." She smiled softly, her eyes warm. "Anytime." As they finished their meal, James felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. He wasn't ready for a new relationship just yet, but he had learned something valuable. He didn't need to rush. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All he had to do was move forward, one step at a time. And as he walked out of the restaurant with Claire that night, he realized that he had already begun to heal. Not because of the time that had passed, but because he had finally learned to value himself, and his mother's memory, enough to let go of what wasn't right for him. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place several months later. James returned to his mother's grave on the anniversary of her passing. It had been a year since that fateful night, and while he had felt an immense sadness, he also felt stronger. The pain was still there, lingering, but it no longer consumed him. As he stood in front of her grave, he spoke softly, the words coming from his heart. "Mom, I miss you every day. But I promise you, I've learned to stand up for what's right. I won't let anyone disrespect your memory again." A breeze picked up, the leaves rustling around him. For the first time in a long time, James felt a profound sense of peace. He had done the right thing. He had honored his mother's legacy and refused to let anyone tarnish it. As he left the cemetery that day, he walked away knowing that he was ready for whatever the future held. It wasn't about the wedding he had once dreamed of, or the woman he had thought was the one. It was about having the strength to choose himself, to honor his past, and to make the future his own. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think. Your feedback really helps me create better content for you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. Thanks again and see you in the next video. Take care.